All right, everybody, let's get started. Before we even get into, we talked about before that, in this course, we're going to be learning about hypertext markup language, also known as HTML. We're also going to cover cascading style sheets, also known as CSS. Before we even kind of get to that, we have to understand a little bit about how the internet works. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk a little bit about just kind of interaction basics. So what is it? What is something that's interactive? We'll talk a little bit about internet history. Actually goes back a little bit farther than most of you probably might think. And then we'll talk about how does the internet work? Okay. Whoa. All right, so I'm going to start. By the way, this is still the slides from today. If you want to look at the slides and follow along with me. So let's start with computer history. The idea of a computer has actually been around a very long time. Okay. I don't have an exact year, but most people kind of trace it back to about the 1860s. Okay. A computer originally was a job title, as in one who computes, as in basically your job was to sit around and do math. What kind of people were sitting around and doing math? If you're like an accountant or something, or, this is before computers, what we consider computers. So if you wanted to like calculate your position on a boat or calculate how a cannonball might go, this is, you would need someone to compute that. You would have someone sit around and do math and do physics and things like that. So that's originally what the term computer meant. Okay, it really wasn't until about the 1920s that a computer meant a device, something that's a physical, a non-human, essentially, device. Okay, so in the 1920s, we had the first computer. Computers were extremely large. When I say extremely large, I mean they were literally the size of a room. Okay, look at this person in court, in relationship to the computer. Okay. They were filled with vacuum tubes, which is a very outdated technology. They literally could fill an entire interior room, and they probably had about as much computational power as either calculator app on your smartphone. Okay, but it was a starting place. It's what we had. The first real group that put funding into computers was the U.S. military. U.S. military is usually behind a lot of inventions, and this is no different. The military was using this to run things like payroll, maybe figure out coordinating things on a map, like I said, like pinpointing a boat or something like that. That's called triangulating. So I'm assuming that's probably what the computer was used for. About the 1950s, that is when computers got declassified as a form of technology. And the first group to really kind of pick it up were businesses. And when I say businesses, I mean like we're talking like Fortune 500 companies, like very large companies. It wouldn't be like a mom and pop. We're talking like, I don't know, IBM or like, something like that, like Metro North or something. By the way, when I talk about computers, computers were extremely expensive. It was basically not feasible for any one person to be able to afford a computer. So businesses had a computer, singular, uno, less than 2 computers, okay? It was very technical. You needed someone who was trained on how to use it because it was not very user-friendly. That person, that job's got to be kind of stressful because it's a very expensive piece of equipment. Okay, so businesses were using computers mostly to do things, once again, mundane tasks, payroll, things like that. It really wasn't until the 1970s that we started seeing a little bit of a change. So in the 1970s, both the cost of computer parts had gone down and the cost of manufacturing computers had gone down. Like I said, in the 50s, computers were so expensive, it wasn't feasible for an average individual to have it, even if you were more wealthy. But by the 1970s, not to say that computers were cheap, but they were a lot less expensive. Also, remember that in the 30s and such, computers were literally like the size of a room. And who's got a whole room to dedicate to a computer? Not a lot of people. But by the 1970s, what had happened is the parts had been getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So eventually we get a computer that can fit on someone's desktop, a desktop computer. And it's not for a business, it's a personal computer or a PC, okay? So, you know, this is the beginning of average individuals to have computers. Move forward a little bit to the 90s, early 90s. There's a big rush on people buying computers, okay? So until the 90s, not to say the computers, you know, some people had computers, but they weren't as common as they are now. The reason why is a lot of people, A, you know, if you were middle class or below, you probably couldn't afford one. And B, there wasn't really a lot of reason to have one. I mean, there was things like Microsoft Word, you know, there were word processing programs like Microsoft Word, but that's kind of about it. You know, if you wanted to play games, sure. But, you know, for a lot of people, it was kind of an expensive luxury that they couldn't really afford. What really changed in the early 90s was this thing called the internet, or really it was called America Online, but essentially it was the internet. And the thing about the internet was you could only access it on a computer. There were other devices at the time. There were like Nintendo Entertainment Systems and Sega Genesis Entertainment Systems and such, but those couldn't run the internet. Only a computer could run the internet. So if you wanted to be able to access this cool new thing called the internet, you needed to have a computer. And so that kind of sparked a lot of people who maybe were holding out on purchasing a computer to purchase a computer. All right, so by the early 90s, you know, we start getting, every family probably has like one computer, okay? It's kind of the family computer, probably sits in like the den or the, you know, the dining room or something like that. Moving on to the late 90s, early 2000s, the cost of computers, once again, had gone down. The cost of parts had gone down. The sizes were getting a little bit more manageable. And so you start kind of getting this idea of every person has a computer, okay? So instead of it necessarily being the family computer that everybody shares, every person gets their own computer, okay? Moving forward to about 2007, a new technological breakthrough happens. We get the iPhone, or more importantly, what we really get is the idea of a smartphone or a mobile computer. Okay. So if you have a smart device, you know, like a smartphone or a tablet, that is a computer. It's a very limited computer. It's not as powerful as this desktop that I'm using right here to record this, but it is a computer. Another thing that makes it kind of unique is its size. It being so small, it can literally fit in your pocket. All right, so if you go through this history we got going here, we got computers the size of rooms, computers that eventually can fit on your desk. Hey, that's awesome. To now, computers can literally be in your pocket, and you can have a computer on you literally all of the time if you want to. Okay, so that's kind of a new sort of movement of like, hey, everyone, you know, at this point, everyone has a computer. Most people at this point in 2007 have multiple computers. They have, you know, probably a laptop or a desktop computer, and they also probably have some form of smartphone, whether it's an iPhone or some sort of Android or something like that. Okay, so we have people having multiple computers, not just one. Okay, moving along, 2014, release of the iWatch. iWatch, autocorrect is correct. The iWatch is what we would refer to as wearable technology. Okay, so not only do most people have a smartphone, which is a computer, a lot of people have a laptop at home, If you have a game system, those are computers. Once again, they're very limited computers, but they are computers in the fact that they can run programs and things like that. What we get here is the idea that like we now have computers that can literally wear them as fashion. You know, you can argue that smartphones are already kind of like that, but you know, this is like literally something that just kind of sits on your wrist. So if you have an iWatch or something kind of like that, that's a wearable technology. And now in 2022, we have what is referred to as the Internet of Things. This is this kind of buzz term a lot of people say, sometimes looks like this, IoT, Internet of Things. Essentially what Internet of Things means is like the cost of computers are so small. You can literally purchase a computer like a Raspberry Pi, which is a computer for like $50. You know, it's not a powerful computer, but it is a computer. You can install computers in almost anything. So nowadays we have like cars with computers installed in the dashboard. We have toasters that have computers, and we have fridges that have computers in it. Basically, you can put a computer in almost anything. Okay, so now in 2022, not only do everyone watching here probably have, most of you have your own desktop, or maybe you have a laptop, you guys probably have a smartphone, you probably have something like a tablet of some form, and maybe you have a computer in your car, maybe you have a computer in your fridge, if you have a new fridge, maybe you have, you know, washer dryers have them now. So it's like, and this is only going to continue to the point where we are constantly interacting with objects that have computers in them. All right, so like I said, a couple of, you know, here's some examples of computers. We got desktops, boom. We got laptops, boom. These are more traditional smartphones, tablets, game systems. If you have like a PS5 or whatever the cool new thing is, that's a computer. Okay, wearable technology, Fitbits, iWatches, you know, Google Glass, all that kind of stuff. You have a, you know, Oculus Quest, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, there, you know, you have a Nest, that's a thermostat that has a computer in it. Toasters, cars, you know, everything has a computer in it these days. All right, so in the next bit, we're going to talk a little bit about computer input and computer output.